Live now. Billy, if you just turn your camera off just now whilst the slideshow's on, sorry.
All right, got it. Okay.
Well, good evening and welcome back to Real Lives Online, or welcome to Real Lives Online. If this is the first time you've joined us, my name is Martin Ayres. I'm the senior pastor of St Silas Church in Glasgow. And whether you're in Glasgow or further afield, it's great you could join us this evening. And shortly I'll be welcoming Billy McCurrie, who was just there. So Billy, thanks for the wave. Great to see you. Before we hand over to Billy, who's our guest this evening, we've been having a brilliant week so far. 2 nights ago, we heard from Emma Scrivener, who told her own very compelling, breathtakingly honest story of struggles with severe mental health and recovery and hope. And she talked about positive mental health in lockdown. And that talk and that interview, that conversation is there on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. If you missed that, last night we were with Kieran Dodds, world-class photographer, who shared, by sharing his screen in the interview, some of the photographs he's taken, some of the projects he's worked on, and talked a bit about how his worldview drives so much of what he does. I thought it was absolutely fascinating, terrific time. And again, you can watch that in the next few days if you want to on YouTube. But we wanted to mention as well how our Real Lives Online continues after tonight. So this Sunday is Back to Church Sunday. Back to Church Sunday was an event that took place first time about 10 years ago, I think, with enormous success as a way of saying to people who had perhaps been to church for a wedding before or an occasion, and or maybe been through school, a school visit or something, but not been for some time. Why not come back to church? Why not come and see? And that's been something that's gone on from time to time across churches across the UK physically. At the moment, for St Silas and other churches in Scotland, we can't meet physically because of the restrictions. So our services are online on our YouTube channel at 11 a.m. live streamed, or we have one on Zoom at 6:30 that you can sign up for through our website. You get sent the Zoom link. So if you prefer something that was a little bit more intimate and where you actually are part of the meeting in a way that can be seen, you can join our Zoom one on Sunday evening. Or if you just want to watch something, you could do that by watching our live stream on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. So why not join us this Sunday? If you've not been to church for many years, you maybe got out the habit of coming, you've drifted from it, and you'd like to look into it again. It's never been easier. And for those of us who regularly go to church, this is a very painful time because we are missing the kind of what we so much enjoy and benefit from in being with a group of people that we're going through life together with, that feel like a family. And we've lost that. But actually, if you're a guest, it's never been easier to try church, because wherever you are, whatever you're wearing, whichever room of your house you want to be in or your flat, you can join us on YouTube. We'd love you to do that this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Just to mention as well that off the back of what you hear tonight from Billy, or what you interact with on Sunday, if you join us, either way, you might have some questions. You might think now has come for a time when you want to explore the Christian faith. And we want to give an opportunity for that. We always welcome guests and questions as a church, but actually there's a particular opportunity starting a week on Tuesday. So Tuesday, the 9th of March, and it's on Zoom, and it's called the Life Course, and it's 4 Tuesday evenings, and it's a chance to take a look at life's big questions and look a bit at some of the teaching of Jesus and the life of Jesus, looking at who is he, why did he come, what does it mean to follow him. You can ask any question you want, or if you'd rather just stay silent, even have your screen off, but just listen to the conversation, we'd love you to join us. That's on Tuesday, the 9th of March. And there's details there on that flyer, an email address. You just email in and we send you the details so that you can join us on the 9th of March that evening, just to give that a try. It runs for 4 evenings, 4 Tuesday evenings, but you can just try the first one. Tonight, we want to have a sense of participation. You can chat on the YouTube live feed if you'd like to, but also you might have a question for Billy as we listen to his story. And the way we're doing that is if you go to slido.com you can type in at slido.com St. Silas, where there's a hashtag in a box, and you'll be taken to the page, or you follow this link, www.slido.com/St. Silas. And you can submit a question. You can also vote for a question. If you see a question on there you'd like to hear Billy answer, you can indicate that you support that question, and that will move it to the top. And we'll hopefully give some time towards the end of the interview to pitching some of those at Billy, so that we hear from him answers to your questions. I'll do my best to ask the kind of questions you would hopefully be asking as well. And then we'll have a short reflection at the end that I'll give, and then we'll wrap up by 9 o'clock. So that's what's going on from here on in. And just a reminder, therefore, slido.com/St. Silas. So hopefully you can now see Billy. I've stopped sharing my screen so that you can see Billy. Thanks so much for joining us, Billy. Where are you dialing in from?
Thanks for the invite. I'm dialing in from Ormskirk tonight, which is just north of Liverpool. You can tell that I've got a Lancastrian accent, can't you?
It's not rubbed off on you, Billy. But
No,
we got to know each other when we were much nearer one another, when I was in Preston. It's been great to work with you a few times. But tell us a bit about where you are from. Tell us a bit about your background growing up. And just bearing in mind, I mean, if we think your average person watching tonight might know somebody, not necessarily, they might know somebody from St. Silas. We've got quite the age range at St. Silas. There's people who come who are in their 80s. There's people who come who've got young children. There's a bunch of guys who are youths or young adults who might not know anything of the Troubles. And so it's take us back to what it was like growing up in Northern Ireland.
Okay, Martin, very briefly, you know, it wasn't so long ago that Northern Ireland featured on the news pretty regularly. Like, it doesn't do so as much today. But if any folks are familiar with what happened in the 70s, it really goes back. Well, the violence in Ireland goes back centuries, you know. But coming up to 100 years ago this year, Ireland was partitioned. So you had 6 counties to the north that remained part of the United Kingdom, 26 counties to the south, which became an independent Republican state. And that idea of partition was to try and solve the problem of the violence, but obviously it didn't, because there was a very sizable Roman Catholic minority that wanted to sever the link with the United Kingdom and have an all Ireland. So, you know, the violence continued. There were outbursts of violence during the history of the northern state. But anytime there was violence, it had sort of petered out and died down after, 18 months, 3 years maximum, I think. But in 1968, 69, Troubles erupted, as they became known, in the streets of Belfast and Derry. And those Troubles lasted for 30 years. Sadly, many lives were lost as a result of that period of violence. But that's just a very crass sort of introduction to Northern Ireland.
So then the norm was what you'd have grown up, you'd have seen soldiers in the street, would you? Would you have been stopped and searched for weapons? What else did you have to get used to?
Okay. Well, I was born in the late 50s, okay, so I'm a child of the 60s, really, that whole sort of cultural revolution of the 60s, pop music, the Beatles, etc. I had an older sister and an older brother, and they were into the Monkees and the Beatles and Herman's Hermits. Now, some of your congregation will remember that, some people listening will remember that. Brother was into the Stones and Motown, so I was introduced to music through them, and my mum, who used to go around the house singing when she was cleaning country songs. So, that sort of had a bit of an influence also. It was a very happy, very loving home, okay? But when the troops arrived in Belfast in 1968, which was supposed to be a short-term deployment, as I said, it lasted 30 years. Yeah, there was a novelty factor, seeing soldiers on the streets, their armored cars, and army Land Rovers and the soldiers with their guns and the the barbed wire sort of fences, barricades they put up around the area. So that was a novelty factor, and certainly as the Troubles wore on, yeah, there was more of an impact on people's lives with searches, a ring of steel around the city centre to stop car bombs being brought in, and the constant searches. And it's amazing just how quickly people adopt to that change of lifestyle and just live their lives around it. But yeah, but see, talking about troops arriving in the streets of Belfast in 68, 69 was the deployment. What really captivated me as a boy growing up was the Apollo space program, more than what was unfolding on the streets of Belfast, Martin.
So that's what your head was full of. Say a bit more about just from the general of the Troubles. You've already said a little bit. Tell us a bit more about growing up in the McCurrie family home, your hopes and dreams, and what it was like. In the family home. Was it a happy home? Yeah,
well, it was an extremely happy home. My mum and dad just wanted to build a happy, secure, loving home, and they were very loving parents, very devoted parents. And yes, as I said, as just as a young boy, when Kennedy had made that speech about we'll land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, like I was just a primary school when he, maybe not even going into primary school, but as that program developed, certainly as a young boy, like that captivated my imagination, what was beyond this planet. And just the sheer size of those Apollo Saturn V rockets, and to watch as they took off from Cape Canaveral in Florida and follow it all. Yeah, it was just fascinating. So that was what was captivating me as a little boy, more than what was unfolding in the streets of the province.
Yeah, sure. And just briefly, I mean, where was faith in that, Billy, in the home? Was it a Christian home? Did you go to church? What was that for you?
I reckon if you'd have said to my mum, you're Christian, she would have said yes, okay, but it was nominally Christian. It was sort of go to church at Christmas and Easter. We were sent to Sunday school as kids in the area. I think it was mainly because parents just wanted to get a bit of peace, and so shoved the kids out to Sunday school for an hour. If you'd have said to my dad, were you a Christian, he would have dismissed God right away. He would have been atheistic, agnostic, certainly. His regiment was one of the regiments that liberated Belsen in the Second World War, and he said that what he witnessed in Belsen was enough to convince him there was no God. So if you'd asked my dad, were you a Christian, he'd give you a short shift. But my mum would have said, yes, she's a Christian. So it wasn't a particularly religious home. And if any religious input at all, it was through mum's encouragement of just shoving us out of the way for a while as children,
Sure. So, Billy, you're growing up in this happy home. Your head's full of the Apollo missions. You've got your mum's singing at home. You've got this good family background, but things did change terribly for you one Saturday when you were 12. I know it's sad to go through it again, but just tell us a bit about how that day started. That day, what was it like just at the beginning of the day for you?
Yeah, the beginning of the day, my mum came up and woke me up and asked if I would like to go to a walk with my dad. He was going out for a walk that morning, and I would have liked to go with him. So I got up and went with him. I'm really glad, looking back, that I didn't turn over and say, no, I'm staying in bed. But yeah, I got up and we headed off together that morning, and it was a glorious, glorious morning. Really hot, not a cloud in the sky. And I think the month before, it's the end of May, maybe it was, in 1970, Brazil had just won the World Cup. And then with the Apollo sort of missions and things, where man landed on the moon, previous July, I think the whole way along the walk, I was just peppering my dad with questions about football and space. And, he's probably demented, a sort of 12-year-old just beside him, talking incessantly, excitedly. But it was lovely, it holds so many precious memories. And I think we must have started off maybe around about 9:30 that morning. We didn't get home until about maybe 1:30, 2:00. The whole morning, start of the afternoon, I spent with my dad. Whole so many precious memories.
Yeah.
And yet, by the end of the night, those precious memories, which are so special for me today, but all the dreams, and all the questions about football and whatever, well, it was all shattered, because
yeah. Tell us a bit more about what changed. Tell us about how things changed that evening.
My dad went out that evening. My mum said it was the first time he had been out in 13 weeks. He'd gone to he gone out to see his friends. Looking back, I could say it was because in the west of Belfast that day there was violence, and there were half a dozen people killed, I think. And knowing what life's like today, and what people pick up in the news, he's probably gone out to talk with his friends about this event that happened in the west of the city. But they were coming back to our house that night after the club had closed. Or when I say they, my dad and his friends, just something that took place in Belfast at the time, when the men had been out drinking socially. At the end of the night, they would go back to somebody's house for a cup of tea and a slap-up meal. So they were coming back to our house that night. My dad said, "I'll run on ahead and get my wife to get the kettle on." But as he turned the corner to make his way home, a number of IRA gunmen opened up and he was shot dead. I remember hearing that first blast of automatic gunfire around about 11:30 that night, and little did I know it was my dad, who was in the receiving end of that blast of gunfire. But as soon as the gunfire started, it just continued right through the rest of the night. Dad wasn't the first civilian to be killed. He was among one of the first civilians to be killed at the start of the Troubles. And my mum talks a wee bit more about it today than she had done previously. She said that she wanted to put me to bed that night, and I had said, no, I want to stay up. I've got something to say to my dad. I need to ask him something. And she let me stay up to wait my dad coming home, because it just seemed to be so urgent. I needed to see my dad. Now, whether it was just, as a boy at 12, I wanted to stay up a bit later because it was, as I said, glorious summer's day, and 27th of June, 11:15 at night, it's just getting dark. But my mum let me stay up. So that's why I was up. When the gunfire started, and because it was such a lovely night, a lot of the women in the street, they were just neighborly, they were standing in little groups, 3s and 4s, talking. This gunfire started, and there was the panic. And I remember a man running down the street shouting, "They're shooting, they're shooting." Well, obviously we knew that, we could hear it. And I was trailed into a neighbour's house. You could separate it from my mum. The shooting's continuing. I was sitting on the seat and I had my eyes closed. People were coming and going. and I could hear hushed whispers, people saying, "It's awful, it's terrible. Does he know? Has anybody told him?" Because I was sitting with my eyes closed. I think they thought I was sleeping. And I remember getting up and saying, "What's awful? What don't I know? What haven't you told me?" And that this house was full of adults, like, who were sheltering from this shooting. And I just run, and they tried to grab me as I was going out the door. And I was running up the street, and I can still see the tracer bullets in front of me as I'm running up the street. And my friend's dad stepped out and grabbed me. And I must have been crying. Yeah, I was crying. I was saying, I must have picked something up in the house, and I was saying, "Where's my daddy? Where's my daddy?" And he said to me, "Billy, your daddy's not coming home. Your daddy's dead." And I remember saying to him, "Well, this is God's will." And he grabbed me by the shoulders, and he nearly shook the life out of me. And he said, "This has nothing to do with God. There is no God." And he used an expletive, and he said, "It's those across the road," referring to the Republican community across the road from us where the shooting was coming from. And he said, "There is no God. Never you forget that." And that's how I heard about my dad's death, and I guess that there is no God stuck with me, because I never went back to Sunday school or anything after that. The impact of my dad's death was shattering in my home life.
So Billy, was your dad targeted? Was he a political activist, or was it just wrong place, wrong time?
As I say, wrong place, wrong time. The gunmen knew that whoever turned that corner that night was the enemy as they perceived it. Could have been anybody. He was just the one that turned the corner first, and he was killed. And it was devastating for the home. I often say, my family don't have a monopoly on violence, and lots of families have been touched as a result of the violence that emanated from Ireland. Not just north and south, but also here in mainland England. And not everybody reacted the way I reacted or my family reacted, but we reacted with hate and bitterness. It came into the home practically right away. The hate and the anger and the rage. So there's this home that was so loving.
So your mum was expecting at the time, is that right?
Yeah,
what was her reaction to losing her husband?
My mum was 3 months pregnant, and she was absolutely devastated, obviously. And my kid brother was born 6 months to the day after my dad was killed. And Mum often said, were it not for the fact that she had a little child to look after, she would have been involved in terrorism. Her hate and her bitterness was tangible, as a result of what had happened. And that was for all of us in the family, except probably my younger sister. She became a Christian when she was about 13, but for my older brother, sister, and myself, there was an insatiable longing for revenge because of what had happened,
So your younger brother never knew his dad?
No.
And how did that make you feel as his
Well, we hear a lot today about, radicalization and things like this, and what causes people to be radicalized. When, seeing your dad brought home in a box as a result of being shot, sow seeds of radicalization, to use the buzzword, and when my kid brother was born, what effect did that have? I can still remember him as a wee boy running in off the street, running up to my mum and asking what a daddy was. How come his friends had a daddy to talk about and he hadn't? And to see my mum break down in tears, and try to explain why there was no father figure in the home. I understand there as a young teenager thinking, you know, what can I do to comfort my mum? There's nothing, you know. It sows the seeds of hatred and bitterness, you know. And so, yeah, that whole radicalization process, to use a buzzword, you know, is just fed every day by what you see in the home, the effect that's happening in the home. You know, the fact that my wee brother run in saying, "What's a daddy?" You know, obviously, whether it was, I think maybe my mum just couldn't bring herself to talk about my dad or whatever. I don't know, but obviously, you know, a kid brother, you know, he was wondering why, as a toddler, he didn't have a daddy. You know, and I say, yeah, it just sows the seeds of hatred and bitterness.
Yeah. So your mum, who'd been a singing, joyful woman, just all of that turned into
she
bitterness,
didn't, she never, she
grief.
said she never sang again after my dad was murdered.
Yeah.
She stopped singing because she said she had nothing to sing about. It was just this mountain of hate that grew and grew and grew, and this darkness that enveloped the whole family. You know, it was like a cancer, Martin.
Thanks, Billy, for being so honest with this. So then you're seeing that, looking on helplessly, and then I suppose the moment comes where you feel you can act, because you joined a terrorist organization, didn't you? So
Yeah.
What was that, and how did you join that? How did that work?
It was quite easy in the mid 70s, you know, to join organizations and working class areas in particular. You know, it's expected, I think, of most young lads to be involved to some degree. So paramilitary groups frequented public houses, and people in the area knew what particular organization frequented what particular pub. And so I joined the junior wing of the UVF. I remember the night I joined, I went into this bar in East Belfast the night this paramilitary meeting was taking place. And the commander of this little unit came up to me. There was 3 of us joined together this night. And he asked the 3 of us what we wanted to do. I think the 3 of us were, of the same mindset, you know. But I remember saying to him, you know, the only thing I want to do is kill. And he laughed and made a gesture with his hand, you know, just turning around and to the group of about, 60 guys behind him, young lads. And he laughed and he said, "Oh, you want to kill somebody?" He says, you got to wait your turn. There's about 60 in front of you. And, you know, that's what I found frustrating that night I walked into that bar. You know, the fact that I was in a queue in order to, you know, get my revenge.
So they trained you, did they? It was easy to find them, and then you knew what you were doing, and they trained you in how to use a gun or something.
Well, here it was easy to find them, and all you needed was the willingness to do things. And Martin, might sound crass, you know, and brutal, but you don't need much training to, you know, to be an assassin. Like, all you need to do is know how to point that and how to pull this trigger. Yeah, and it's as ugly as that. So it is, and you know, yeah, pointing a gun at somebody and pulling the trigger, yeah, it gets rid of one, but I want to kill more, and so I started training in bomb making, because you can kill more people with a bomb than you can with a gun. And so, yeah, I was taking courses in bomb making from men who were older than myself and experienced in that sort of field. But yeah, that's how dedicated I was. And where was God in all this? God was nowhere. Because as far as I was concerned, there was no God. You know, if there had been a God, like, you could have stopped my dad being killed. Could have stopped all the pain and all the hurt. and all the
So
anger.
Billy, they
Yeah.
put you out on a mission. Tell us a bit about that, about the mission and how old you were at that time.
Yeah, I was 17. It was 45 years ago last Friday. I was asked to carry out a killing. It was initially asked in October 75, but myself and a friend that I joined the organisation with, one of my friends that joined the same night, was told that he was an IRA man. We want to be part of this shooting, and of course we did. But then all of a sudden, it was cancelled. It was called off, this hit that was to take place in October 75, and I heard nothing more until February 76, when the commander of the little group that we were involved with came up to the two of us and he said that the hit's back on again. Are you still prepared to do it? Yeah. Well, it's not an IRA man, it's one of our own members, and we think he's an informer. Do you still want to do it? Well, as far as I was concerned, everybody in the organisation knows the rules. If you inform the police, it's an immediate death sentence. So yeah, I was prepared to do that. And besides, I felt if I had pulled out and said, no, I'm not going to do it, they would have thought, well, he's all talk. He's been spouting here long enough about wanting to be operative, and when he gets a chance, he bottles it. And so that was another reason. But then he said to us, and with another problem, we only need one of you to do this shooting, because this is an informer. One of the provost marshal has to carry it out also. So we only need one of you to do it. And the two of us were arguing about who was going to do the shooting. And I remember him pulling a coin out of his pocket and he tossed it in the air. And he says, right, call. I think I called heads. And right enough, it was heads. So I got to do the shooting. And I say it was 45 years ago last Friday. It was a Thursday morning in 1976. Early in the morning, me and the accomplice went and picked up the guns, went to the designated place behind shops in the upper Newtonards Road. Anybody's familiar with East Belfast, little place called the Arches, where the Newtonards Road and Hollywood Road sort of fork. He worked in a butcher shop, and he parked his car behind the premises of work, which was handy because that was a derelict street. So me and the accomplice, we were hiding in one of these derelict houses. And when he came, we very coldly, bloodily, brutally, without mercy, killed him. There was no twinge of conscience or anything. And there was nobody humanly, nobody saw us doing that shooting because it was a derelict street. It was about 7:20. It was about 20 minutes after the shooting before even the police turned up on the scene. So we were well away. I think even before the police turned up, I was probably in Harlem Wolf, in to do a day's work. So yeah, that's how cold and callous it was,
Even in the aftermath of that, was there any sense of a guilty conscience, a sense of, a guilt of
no, sadly, looking back, there wasn't, because now that I had proven myself within the organisation, as far as I was concerned, there was nothing going to hold me back. I was going to go on a killing spree. I had now proven myself that I could do this. And so, yeah, I was just going to go out and take as many lives as possible, and I said I was 17, and it sounds, callous, but see, with a gun in my hand at 17, I thought I was God, So I'll say who lives and who dies. Nobody's going to argue. And that's looking back at, that's frightening, you know.
Frightening. It sounds like it was a mercy in a way that you got caught. Tell us a bit about that. You were sentenced. You got caught. Was there? Yeah. How did you get caught without witnesses there?
Yeah. It came out at the trial that we were arrested due to information received, which was police talk for an informant. So somebody informed on us, ironically. But yeah, I was arrested 2 weeks after the shooting, and it was a mercy, looking back, that I was arrested and found myself in the Maze prison. There was no sense of shame, you know, about going into prison, no sense of remorse or anything. And oddly enough, you know, folks might think it's strange, but there was no stigma attached to going into prison, certainly in Northern Ireland in the 70s, because of you know, the high level of violence and paramilitary related violence. A number of folks felt that that type of violence was justified in the community, you know. So there's no stigma attached to it. And
so
yeah,
sorry, Billy. So you taken you get caught, you get put in the Maze prison. Obviously, that's protecting other people from you harming them. But the Maze prison was notorious, wasn't it? Tell us a bit about what was so notorious about actually being inside for you.
Yeah. Notorious. On my remand time, I was placed in a UVF compound. So it was run along military lines. We dressed up in our paramilitary uniform. The organisation had complete control of the compound. Okay, prison officers weren't allowed in unless they asked permission. And so the whole compound was administrated by ourselves as an organisation. Right within that, did the terrorism stop? No, because there were still talks on bomb making inside. So although we didn't have the wherewithal, you know, they would use substitute sort of material and say, this is what happens. Okay, so all that bomb making stuff continued inside. Now, the authorities aren't stupid. They know what's going on. So they want to get rid of this special category status, which is what they did in 1976. And if anybody's familiar with the history of the province, the H blocks, another part of the Maze prison, opened in 1976, and the whole reason for that was to do away with special category status. But those who were arrested for what they perceived as political crimes, you know, felt that we still want this special status. So coming from the H blocks, you have the Republican hunger strike. You have the Republican started off with a blanket protest, the prisoners just sitting in the cell with a blanket around them. Then it went to a dirty protest where they smeared their excrement over the cell walls, and then accumulated with the hunger strike in 1980. So all of that emanates from the Maze. That's why it's so notorious. But yeah, I went in as a 17-year-old, and I felt an element of pride, you know, rather than any remorse, like.
And you're serving a life sentence there? What were you sentenced to?
Well, I was too young to be given a life sentence, so I was sentenced to be detained under the Secretary of State's pleasure and transferred to the H blocks of the Maze prison to serve out my time there. So yeah, there's no difference between a life sentence and Secretary of State's pleasure. It's basically the same. It just takes longer to say Secretary of State's pleasure. That's the only difference. Like.
So when that sentence was handed down, how did you feel?
Oh, there was an arrogance like about me. You know, I stood in Belfast High Court on the 12th of May, 1977, and was found guilty of that murder and, you know, membership of a terrorist organization, and arrogantly practically laughed in the judge's face. Such was my contempt for for man's justice. Such was my contempt for law and order, you know.
And your mother, when that sentence was handed down, how did she feel?
Well, obviously she was sort of devastated when I was arrested. My family knew that I was involved in an organization, and they were supportive of that. But because of my age, I think they thought I was really just someone who stood on a street corner and kept lookout for police or army coming up. I wasn't involved in anything serious. So I think when the charges were actually read out in court, they were quite taken aback at just how much I was involved. But I remember my mum saying to me in prison that she could sleep soundly in her bed at night knowing where I was, because when I was outside, she didn't know what I was up to. And my friend who lost the toss of the coin that I mentioned a few minutes ago, he carried on, obviously operating, and he was blown up by his own bomb 45 years ago tomorrow night. And 41 years ago tomorrow night. But you know, I remember sitting in the visiting room and her saying to me, you know, I always feared that you would end up the way your wee friend ended up. That someday I would get a knock on the door and it would be the police coming to tell me you had been blown up by your own bomb, or you had been shot dead because you were out doing something. So yes, although the family were supportive of my involvement in the organization, but because of what had happened, there was always that fear that I could lose him also, you know.
Yeah. Now, Billy, in prison there are chapel services. Did you go to them?
No
There'd
time.
be a Gideon Bible in your cell, presumably, or around that time.
Threw it out.
You threw it out.
Yeah, honestly, no time for it at all.
And yet here we are, Billy. We're interviewing you. Clearly, something has happened, and it didn't happen all of a sudden, did it? So, when did you start thinking about God? When did that process start?
That's
for you?
A good question. Here, I'll try and remember to interject with something about church services there in a minute, because first time I encountered a Christian really was shortly after I was sentenced. A fellow called Peter Thompson arrived in the Yates block. I knew Peter well. Peter was a guy that I'd been on remand with. But as soon as Peter had arrived in the Yates blocks, having been sentenced, he was carrying a Bible and talking about Jesus. So he was a different Peter that I had left behind when I had left to be sentenced. Here was this guy now carrying a Bible and talking about this conversion. And Peter, when he got to the Yates blocks, he said if anybody needed a haircut, you know, they could send for him. And he became the block barber. Now, he had never cut anybody's hair in his life, but he was the one that you had to send for if you needed a haircut. And you know, there was a method in Peter's madness, because he had the sort of run of the Yates block then. And as soon as you asked him to cut your hair, he would just get you in the chair, and he would talk and he'd talk and he'd talk about Jesus. And like, see, when you have no time for God or anything in religion, you know, the last thing you want is, you know, somebody, you know, giving it all out about Jesus. And I remember countless times saying to him, like, Peter, I have no time for this. And his method of evangelism was really novel, because when he's cutting your hair and talking about Jesus and you're saying I have no interest, he would get these scissors and he would put them in the side of the neck, and he would apply a fair degree of pressure. And he would say, right, just another wee bit of pressure, and this is into your jugular. You're lying there in a pool of blood, and see, by the time they get a medic down here to stem the flow of blood, actually you're dead. And because you're not a Christian, you'll be in hell. Like, what about that for evangelism? Like, you know?
Yeah, that's not a method we've adopted yet in Glasgow, but
that was Peter, you know.
That you had that going on, the kind of harassment when you're trying to get your hair cut, and then tell us that there's some literature from New Zealand starts arriving. Tell us about that.
Martin, this is bizarre, like, but this is just how it happened. I started to get magazines from New Zealand. I only ever opened one of them, so I pulled it out halfway, saw the name of Jesus somewhere in the corner, and put it straight in the envelope, curled it up in a ball, and threw it in the waste paper bin. I had no time for God, no time for religion. These magazines are coming. I'm throwing them in the waste paper bin. Wrote out to family and friends and said, you know, did you pass my name and address on to some religious maniacs in New Zealand who are taking great delight in torturing me with this stuff? But here, see, to this day, I do not know anybody in New Zealand. My family don't know anybody in New Zealand. But these things keep coming, and it's a handwritten address. I can still see it. You know, W. McCurrie, Yates Block 4. It was in the Maze prison at that time, and the postmark New Zealand, stamped New Zealand. Yeah, it's bizarre, you know, but that's how it happened. And Peter's still running about the place with his novel approach to evangelism. So Peter's into this religion. I'll give them to Peter, and that's what I did. I sent them to Peter, still unopened. As soon as they reached me, I'd give them back to the prison officer and say, give that to Peter. I ran into Peter one night in the Yates Block medical room, and I said, I hope you're getting the magazines. I don't know who's sending them, but you're welcome to them. And Peter, before he could even answer, the medical officer interjected. And the medical officer said, well, do you not think it's God that's sending you these magazines? I'd never heard anything as ridiculous in all my life. Like, God sending magazines from New Zealand to the Maze prison. And I told this medical officer, he became a good friend, you know, Joe Martin. I said to him, I'm skeptical about God. I don't believe God exists. And I remember him looking at me and saying, well, regardless, he looked at me and I remember him saying, well, regardless of whether you're skeptical about God or not, doesn't take away the fact that there is a God. Nor does it take away the fact that if you die in the state you're in at the moment, you'll go to hell. And once you get there, kid, you won't be skeptical anymore. He said, in fact, you will be a believer, because nobody in that place doubts the existence of God, you know. And the tragedy of it is this, that once you're there, there's no release date. So I couldn't hit him with a line of argument that I was going to have for, you know, you fool. I thought he was going to call me a fool that night. And I turned in, I hightailed it out of that medical room.
And then things came to a head, Billy, one Christmas Eve. Did they tell us about that?
That's right, Martin. Yeah. But here I said, just give me a second. And I said, I'm going off script here tonight, Martin. Sorry about that. But you asked about church, right? Never went to church. But see, when the paramilitaries were up to no good, okay, and they were planning all sorts of nonsense in prison, they ordered everybody to go to church, okay, because that's where all the stupid planning took place. So yeah, they were up to no good one time, and they ordered everybody to go to church so that they could do all their dastardly planning. And the Presbyterian minister opened the Bible and he started to read, and I'm saying to myself as he's reading this, he's reading from Philippians 4, you know, it says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice, and talking about contentment and everything. And I'm sitting listening to this guy, and I'm thinking, has this guy lost his marbles? Does he know where he is? You know, here he is talking about rejoicing. Like, this is the Maze prison. Nobody rejoices. He's talking about contentment. I've never met a prisoner in my life that's content. What on earth is this fool talking about? And I remember him stopping from that, reading that passage in Philippians 4 and saying, do you know where this was written from? And he said it was written from a Roman jail. And the conditions that you are living under would have been far better than what this guy's living under. And look what he's writing. Oh boy, I remember that time, that hit home.
Okay, this guy go on.
Go ahead, yeah.
Just fast forward to that Christmas Eve. What happened? Tell us about what happened.
That Christmas Eve, Gladys Blackburn came down to my cell, little woman who was part of the board of visitors, came down to my cell. After a bit of formal conversation, she lifted down the Bible and she started to read the story of the crucifixion. You know, Jesus being crucified and either side of two thieves. and they're hurling abuse at him. And then one of them has a bit of change of heart and rebukes his partner in crime, talks about Jesus being innocent, and then says to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And she stopped at that 42nd verse in Luke 23, and she said, think who this thief is calling Lord. And she must have, well, she did take time to describe what Jesus looked like on the cross. And as she was reading that and explaining that, for the very first time in my life, I can wonder what I can now term as conviction of sin. For the first time in my life, I felt guilty. I didn't feel guilty when I was carrying out that wicked crime. Didn't feel guilty in Belfast High Court in 1977. Did not feel guilty during the time of my sentence. You know, I would have tried to justify myself, believing I was right in what I had done. But as she read that portion of the Bible, simply read it, explaining about Jesus, for the first time, I felt this overwhelming sense of guilt, and realized that Jesus Christ on the cross, as the thief had said, he was innocent. And this innocent man, he knew none of the vileness or repugnance, none of the evil that characterized my life. And yet on the cross, it became so clear that on the cross, why was he hanging there? He was taking my punishment. I realized that, you know, I'd say it's only God can reveals that. And I asked that woman, how do you become a Christian? And she said, it's as simple as ABC. You know what you learn in primary school, ABC. Accept Jesus Christ died for you, believe it, and then go out and confess it to others. And it was that night, Christmas Eve 1980, I got down on my knees in a cell, it's block 7 of the maze prison, and I threw a wasted life before Almighty God. You know, I repented of my sin. I can't remember what prayer I prayed. I think she left me with a number of Bible verses. One of them was John 6:37. All that the Father give to me will come to me. Him that comes to me, I will never turn away. And I think a couple of gospel tracts, and there must have been a little prayer or something on the back of one of those tracts. How theologically sound it was, I don't know, but well, I prayed that sincerely. Because if Jesus Christ, you know, if he's dying on that cross for me, it demands a response, you know. And I sort of realized that, see if I don't embrace this tonight, I'll never embrace it. It was a pivotal point, I think.
Yeah. So did you feel different straight away?
Well, looking back now, there was no flashes of lightning, claps of thunder, what I would describe as any funny mystical experience. Looking back, if there was anything subjective, I certainly felt clean. And I certainly, when I got up and I had prayed, you know, it didn't feel any different. I'm thinking, well, God's not there. He hasn't listened. I don't feel any different. I expect to feel different. But what was that verse the woman left me with, and through it, all that Father give to me will come to me. So I'm saying, I read, I'm coming, and he who comes to me, I will never turn away. I'm saying, right, I'm going to believe that. Right? I've come to God. I've prayed. I know I've prayed, and I believe there is a God, and that God has heard me regardless of how I feel. And I'm going to believe that word. And I grabbed that promise. And I said, yeah, regardless of how I feel, I'm going to believe it. Yeah, and that's what happened that night, Martin, you know.
And how did you feel looking back on what you'd done, killing that guy?
Martin, not only from the night, but I think from the moment I became a Christian, you know, the regret that I can't turn the clock back and stop what had happened. You know, yeah, there's deep remorse for my actions, deep sadness, sorrow that I ever took up the gun, the bomb, before I took up a Bible, you know.
So then, how does that work in prison? I mean, you're in a prison that's basically continuing to operate as a terrorist organization. So how do you, I mean, no one could look at your case and think, oh, you just became a Christian to make it easier to get out. I mean, it must have, how did that work? Having to explain to the organization that you wanted out.
Yeah, because nobody, I know that nobody walks away from the organization. So when I went up to them and said, well, like, I'm a Christian and I can't follow your orders anymore, it didn't go down too well. But yeah, either this was real or it wasn't. And I had to follow Jesus and take the consequences, or just throw it all in, you know. But on the basis of what, you know, I had realized had happened at Calvary for me when Jesus died, you know, it was a matter of saying, you know, this demands my life, my soul, my all, you know, irrespective of the consequences. So yeah, it was just a matter of saying to these guys, no, do what you want. But I'm taking orders from somebody else now, and that's Jesus. And yes, they did try to have me killed in prison, but God kept his hand upon me. Do we have time to tell you about that? Yeah, I'm going off script here.
I don't know. I'd like to hear it, but we do have to keep moving on. You tell us, and then we'll move on.
Sorry about that. Yeah, well, you know, because I was a Christian, right, and not following that paramilitary orders, it was a bit of a pain for the UVF, and the IRA had someone that they wanted killed also. So the IRA had a meeting with the UVF, and they said, will you kill this member of our organization who we want out of the way? And if you do that, we'll get the propaganda machine in the overdrive on the outside saying, you know, loyalists are killing Republicans here. We need to get segregated. We need special category status back, right? So the UVF said, yeah, we'll kill this guy for you, but you have to do something for us. Kill Billy McCurrie, because he's not taking orders from us. And I remember the commander of the provost came into my cell after the meeting, a guy called Clicky Clark. And Clicky said, you know, we've just had a meeting with the UVF, and we've asked them to kill this member of the organization, IRA man who I knew. We've asked them to kill him. And the UVF said they're going to do it on one condition, that we kill you. He says, but we have told them that we're not going to lay a finger on you because we know you're a Christian and your life's changed. And he says, I can guarantee you can go anywhere in this prison, and I've given an order that not one Republican prisoner will put a finger on you because we know your life's changed. He says, it's not us you need to worry about, it's the UVF. They're the one that's out gunning for you. And, you know, when a man's ways please the Lord, as it says in the Bible, even his enemies are at peace with him. But yeah, I'm going off script tonight, you know. So these things are coming curveballs, yeah.
You're saying that people saw a change in you. How did you start to feel towards the people who killed your dad? I mean, as you look back now, how do you feel about them?
It's good. Well, you know, you asked about the night I became a Christian, how did I feel? You know, see all the hate and all the bitterness, all the anger and all the rage and all the wrath, it went like that. Honestly, it went immediately. You know, so that peace and that contentment which came into my life immediately was there. So yeah, you can't say you're a Christian and forgiven and then say, well, I'm not going to forgive people that have wronged me. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. And so yes, that was part of the transformation in life, is wanting to reach out to enemies. And yeah, I guess by this time I had more enemies in the UVF than I probably had in the IRA, you know. But yeah, you want to reach out with the gospel.
So tell us, Billy, about sharing that news. I mean, you had to tell your family. Tell us about that, about what it was like telling your family about what had happened, that you'd become a Christian.
Yeah. I found the letters that my mum sent to me. a few months ago, Martin, and I remember the first letter that I got back from her after I became a Christian. She said, "I'm pleased for you. You know, it'll be, you'll find it a better life." But I was sort of writing out there and telling her about, you know, this brilliant change that come into my life. And she had sent, my mum sent me a letter saying, how could I talk to her about a God of love and a God of forgiveness? Had I forgotten what had happened to my dad, and where was this great God of love the night your dad was gunned down on the street like a dog by those IRA scum? Yeah, I've got that letter today. You know, as I say, I just found it. And yeah, you could see the hate and the bitterness in the letter. So my mum reacted by thinking, you know, there's no way I'm going to forgive these people for what they've done, and I can't see how you can say you've forgiven them. So I wrote her a letter based on Romans 12:19, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay." And sent a covering letter to my sister, who was a Christian at this time, saying, "Here, get my mum, get her to church with you," which she did. And a couple of weeks after that, my mum sent a letter and she said, "I now know what you mean about God's forgiveness. Tonight at church, I became a Christian." And yeah, you know, such a difference. I said, I've got those two letters today. I just found them a few months ago, and there's different as black as the white. You know, one that's full of hate, and the other one was just talking about, I know about God's forgiveness. And yeah, after my mum became a Christian, I said after my dad was killed, she didn't sing again, and that's true, because she had nothing to sing about. But see, after she became a Christian, she started to sing again. She started to sing these gospel choruses and lovely gospel hymns about God who can transform a life, and about Jesus who came to die for sinners. And yeah, I saw a mountain moved when I saw my mum saved, a mountain of hatred and bitterness. God just lifted it and cast it away. You see, we serve a God that moves mountains, a God who transforms lives. And that's the message that we proclaim. It's a message that the world needs. It's a message that Scotland needs. It's a message that England needs. It's a message that Ireland needs.
So coming to that change of heart, coming to put your faith in that Jesus had died for you, completely changed you. It's like a de-radicalization in the language you used before.
Yeah.
And you became a minister.
That's right.
You're married. Tell us about your marriage. You got children, and
Yeah.
do they know? Do you talk to them about what?
Yeah, well,
do you tell your church? Does your congregation know about your past?
Yeah, well, here, I met my wife at Bible college. Okay, so she had heard a bit about me before we met, but she just took me as she found me, you know, as a believer. Yeah, I've got 5 kids, and they're all sort of in their early 30s, their 20s. The youngest one, Jonah, he was the wee late one. He was a wee surprise. But because his older siblings had known a wee bit about my past, I never kept anything back from them. It was always difficult to know when to tell them. And because Jonah was 7 years between him and his next oldest sibling, he was picking up bits and pieces. And I used to say to me, you know, "Dad, what did you used to do?" And I would say to him, "Well, you know, Jonah, you're too young. I'll tell you when you're a bit older." Like, and this is when he was just a kid at primary school, maybe about 5 or 6 or something, you know. And I remember him running in one night, the living room. I was sitting watching the news. And this wee boy comes running in. He looks at me, and the wee finger's pointing at me. And he says, "You never told me you were a terrorist." I said, "Well, who told you?" I thought it was one of his older siblings. I'm going to get a right telling off here. "You never told me you were a terrorist. Who told you?" He says, "I've just Googled your name, and it's come up on the internet." And the wee hands rubbed together. He says, "Brilliant." He says, "I can't wait to get into school tomorrow to tell all my friends and teachers." Oh, I put my hand on my head. "Jonah, please don't. You know, once you mention the T word, you know, we'll have a SWAT team at the door. I said, do you want to say nothing to nobody? So yeah, that was difficult. As a church situation, I sort of told the elders before I come over, before I get the call to the church, you make sure you tell them about my background. But for whatever reason, they didn't. And I remember the first Christmas I was over, it coincided with my conversion. That's Christmas Eve, I think it was a Sunday. We had an evening service, and I thought, well, you know, a bit different. What I'll do is I'll tell them what happened, you know, 20 years ago, or was it near 30 years ago then? But anyway, I'll tell them what happened. And see, as I'm relating my conversion to them, you could see the congregation, you know, their mouths opening more and more and more. And it was the first they'd heard. So it was, because they didn't. I thought they knew, but they didn't. But obviously, you know, they take me as they find me. You know, they take me as their minister whose life's been transformed by the grace of God.
And Billy, if you were to die tonight, how confident would you be that God's forgiven you and that He would accept you?
Yeah, you know, my confidence is based on the finished work of the Lord Jesus Christ and what God says in His Word. So the Bible says, if I come to God and repent of my sin, He will never turn me away. And on the basis of that, God says that whoever believes in Jesus Christ will never perish but have everlasting life. So if I was to, you know, die tonight, I would absolutely no doubt that I would be absent from the body and present with the Lord on the basis of what Jesus Christ has done, not on the basis of deserving it. Obviously, I don't deserve it. You know, the story of related to you, I would tell you that I don't deserve it. It's all through God's grace. That I can say God has made a promise, and I believe that promise, and that, you know, God isn't turning a blind eye to that wrong, that evil. You know, God isn't saying, yeah, it doesn't matter. That has to be punished. It has to be punished. God is a just God, and so He takes what I deserve, that justice that I deserve, and He places it on His Son Jesus Christ. That's what talked about, that realizing that night that Jesus Christ was dying for me. He was taking the punishment for me. And yeah, God takes my actions seriously. He takes sin seriously. It has to be punished. And yeah, on the basis of what Jesus Christ has done for me, I've absolutely no doubt that if I died, I would go straight to heaven.
So there's just a couple of thanks, Billy. So I mean, that's great to hear. We have had a question from someone just about on Slido, just saying how, you know, what's your response to someone who would say that this just doesn't sound fair? You look at what you've done, that you're a murderer, and you could go to heaven. What's your response to that? What that says about God?
Yeah, well, it isn't fair. You know, we'll call it grace, okay? And grace isn't fair, but because Jesus Christ, who was sinless, you know, takes the punishment. It's grace. It's getting what I don't deserve. That's what grace is. See, the reality is that none of us deserve, you know, God's favor, because we've all have sinned. You know, we're all under God's wrath and God's condemnation. And so God comes to all of us and says, I offer all of you forgiveness. And yeah, I understand. Yes, people can look at the likes of me and say, you know, my life is so much better than yours morally. And so if you're saying you're in to heaven, I'm certainly in, because, you know, I haven't done any of the things that you've done. You see, nobody's life will be measured against my life. God will not set your life against my life and say, well, how does your life measure up to Billy McCurrie's? Oh, you know, your streets ahead of him. You know, God will take your life and He'll set it beside Jesus Christ and say, how does your life measure up to Jesus Christ? Is your life perfect? Because Jesus Christ's life was perfect. So if your life is less than perfect, then you need to come to where I came to, and that's the cross of Christ, and seek forgiveness. And don't be surprised that God has changed the likes of me, hey, because God's been in the business of changing the likes of me for millennia. You know, Moses, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt, give us the law. Moses murdered, like King David, from whom we get the Psalms, the greatest king in Israel. David murdered. The Apostle Paul, to whom we owe most of the New Testament, he was an armchair general. He gave the nod for the murder of the first Christian martyr. God changed all their lives. Like, God's been in the business of changing the lives of people like me for, as I say, for millennia. Do I deserve it? Of course I don't. I deserve God's judgment and God's wrath. But I am thankful that God in his grace reached down and touched my life, turned it round.
And Billy, just last question on this. Another one that was submitted here was just about, you look back on the sorrow that came into your life as a child, and the questions that brought, for people like your mum as well. How can there be a God and this happened to us? How do you now hold those things together, that you're following a good God?
Yeah.
So presumably you believe he could have stopped what happened to your dad, and he didn't stop that. So
Yeah.
that's a stumbling block for some people. How do you hold that together?
Yeah.
That God didn't stop that in your childhood.
Yeah. The only way I can do that is, I recognize that, I planned all my actions for evil. The IRA, certainly the night my dad was killed, planned their actions for evil too. But God has brought good out of it.
Yeah.
So he has, Now, like it or not, now that I'm a Christian, that this world is a mess. Why is it a mess? Well, I'll go back to the Bible to find out the answer. At Genesis 3, man fell into sin. Now, either you accept that or you don't. I accept that the reason the world's in a mess today is because man has walked out in God. Okay, our relationship with God is broken, and as a result of that, all the mess follows. Now, for those who don't accept that, you've still got the mess. What's your explanation? Okay. Now, God also tells me that he's going to make all things new. Okay. And that he's working out a plan. And I accept that. When I read the Bible about a God who is good, and a God who is kind, and a God who is merciful. See that I'm Christian, like, don't bury my head in the sand. Is there still questions? Is there still tears over what had happened to my dad? Of course. Are there still the whys? Of course. But, there's going to be a day when it'll be the day of God's righteous revelation. God's not obligated to tell us anything, but what that verse implies in Romans is that God will explain why these things happen.
Yeah.
And in faith, I'm prepared to wait till that day.
Billy, thanks so much. Time's against us, but that's been absolutely fascinating. Thanks for sharing with such honesty.
No problem, Martin. And sorry, hey, I went off script a bit. Here, can I just say one more thing?
Go on, if it's quick.
One more thing. Here, this is important because I don't know who's watching, okay? I don't know who'll be watching online, and maybe some kids will be watching this, okay, or some older teenagers, and we'll hear about quite a dramatic sort of conversion experience. And sometimes people think, well, unless I have that type of experience, I'm not really going to be a Christian. That's not true. My wife became a Christian when she was 8 years old. Okay. And God can save children also. And I wish, Martin, I could sit here tonight and say I became a Christian when I was 8. And God saved me from a life of sin. And God saved me from the power of sin. And God saved me from going down a road of seeking my own revenge. Because as a child, I was transformed. That would be a testimony to shout from the rooftops. And so if there's any younger folks watching this,
don't
That's it.
desire a roller
That's
coaster testimony. Yeah,
yeah.
roller coaster story. Yeah,
No.
it speaks of regret.
Yeah,
of
that's right. So
wrongdoing.
sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna.
That's great. Thanks so much, Billy. I think some of our St. Silas youth are watching tonight, so that's a word for them as well. So that's great. Thank you. Now I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes reflecting on one thing. The last couple of nights, what we've done is we've just been reflecting at the end of each Real Lives evening on something that Jesus claimed about himself. And there are these, John, who was one of Jesus' closest followers, records these 7 things that Jesus said, where each time he said, I am something. And very significant, because the word I am is actually, in the language that's used, was a claim to be, to take God's name on himself. And he said, I am. We've looked at him saying, I am the bread of life. We've looked at him saying, I'm the light of the world. And we're just going to think about 2 I ams that he put together, and I'm going to read them for us. They're on the screen there. I am the gate, Jesus says. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus says, I am the gate. And then he says, I am the good shepherd. So just to think about those things just for a minute. The first thing to notice is that Jesus is implying that we're sheep. I don't know how you feel about that. We use the word sheep today, the description, usually to talk about someone who follows the crowd, who's a bit gullible. Oh, they're a sheep. But actually the word sheep, I mean, it's no less humbling in the way Jesus and the Bible uses it. The Bible describes humanity as sheep again and again. But the implication of that is that we are prone to wander and get lost, and we need to be led to safety. And I think that it takes humility to accept that, but it rings true of humanity, that actually we are purposeless and we are lost. And there's all kinds of different competing ideas about what to build your life on. But would we have the humility to see that actually we need a guide? And Jesus then says, after he said that we're sheep, he says there are thieves out there, and we have that in life today. We have people who will try and influence us, and sometimes we think that it's for our good, and then we find out that actually it's all about them and them getting a following. Maybe we think of that with relationships we've been in where we've been stitched up, or we think of maybe political leaders, maybe even religious leaders who it turns out were thieves. Jesus had in mind religious leaders when he said this. But then Jesus makes these 2 claims about himself. The first is, I am the gate. And he says, whoever enters through me will be saved. And the end of verse 10, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. So Jesus is saying there that there is this life that's a better life. And I said this last night about something else Jesus claimed. I just want us to reflect on the way that in our current restrictions in the pandemic, there's a real sense in which people have said we're not really living at the moment compared to some of the things we normally enjoy and live for. This is a restricted life. Well, what if we've all been living this restricted life, but it's all we've ever known, a restricted form of life? And there's a better life to the full, which is life knowing the God who made us and having hope of being with him forever, having the security of being one of his children and knowing him as our Father. And Jesus says that is life in all its fullness, and you'll get it through him because he's the gate to that life. And then the next thing he says is, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And the way I wanted us just to think about that as I close is that Billy here, we've heard a guy who is humble and who will admit that he's not the man he knows he ought to be, and yet who has spoken with great confidence that he is sure if he were to die tonight, God has forgiven him and God would accept him. How do we hold those 2 things together, that someone who's the first to admit, I've not lived a good life, can speak with such confidence of God's acceptance? And the reason is because Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He's speaking there of the idea of a shepherd who would stand in the way of danger And Jesus came to lay down his life at the cross to deal with the wrong ways we've treated God and one another, so that danger is taken away for us. But we have to accept him as our shepherd, and that's all we have to do. If we're willing to trust him, then he will be our shepherd through life, and our shepherd who died for us so that we can enjoy life to the full forever. What do you think of that? What's your response? Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. What's your response to his claim? We'd love you to keep exploring that with us. Join us on Sunday for Back to Church Sunday, 11 a.m. on our YouTube channel. And why not consider coming to the life course a week on Tuesday as well. My time is gone. So Billy, thanks so much again for being with us. It's been great to hear your story.
Sorry I went over time, but thank you.
It's a joy. I was loving it. And I'm sure others were as well. I don't think we lost viewers looking at who's watching. So
thank you, folks.
Thanks for being with us, Billy.